Now, I know lots of you could be worried about the potential tax rises that could be coming in the upcoming budget that is due on the 30th of October this year. We're all searching around for hints of what might be announced. Now, one of the most insightful reports on this, especially when it comes to pensions, has recently been published by consultancy firm LCP. Now, this report is worth taking note of because it's part authored by former pensions minister Sir Steve Webb. Now, Sir Steve Webb was a Liberal Democrat MP and Minister for Pensions under the coalition government. His body of work includes the state pension triple lock, the introduction of auto-enrolment workplace pensions, and pensions freedoms. Now, since leaving Parliament, he has worked for a major pension provider in Royal London and writes regularly for the Daily Mail on pensions, before now becoming a partner with LCP. He has in fact worked in the pension world since 2001, when he was a Liberal Democrat MP and spokesperson for pensions. The man clearly knows his stuff in this area and can give us a useful insight into the heart of government, what their long-term thinking could be. So in this video, I'm going to go through what the report says and the three most likely pension changes that could be coming in the upcoming budget. My name's Carl. I'm a chartered financial planner, regulated financial advisor, and also help run an investment fund. Welcome to the channel. In these videos, I am not providing advice, but purely guidance and tips that hopefully will help you make the best use of your money. We usually cover topics such as retirement planning, investment themes, taxation, and legacy planning. In the introduction of LCP's Pension, Tax and the Budget report, there is a really interesting table that breaks down how much the pension tax relief system actually costs the government. We can see that the combined cost of income tax relief on employee, employer, self-employed pension contributions and investment returns of pension funds comes to around £46.8 billion. On top of this, employers currently get national insurance relief on employer pension contributions, and this costs an additional £23.8 billion. Now, we will come back to this shortly. The report has deducted the amount of income tax and other tax charges that come from pensions in payment, bringing the total net cost of pension tax relief to £48.7 billion. Looking at the size of these numbers, you can see why the government might be so keen to tweak the pension system to raise some extra tax revenue. And having ruled out increases to income tax, national insurance and VAT, which make up around 2/3 of all tax revenue intake, there is little else the government can do apart from attack pensions. Now, one of the big rumours that has been swirling around is the idea of a flat rate of pension contribution tax relief. So rather than higher rate taxpayers getting full tax relief on their pension contributions, they would instead perhaps just get the basic rate like everyone else. LCP do not believe a flat rate of pension tax relief is going to come in and would be possible, as it would be too complex to implement and would create a lot of losers in the system, in particular those working in the public sector. So it could be seen as increasing taxes on working people, something Labour have said they are not going to do. And we've even seen reports in the last few days of Chancellor Rachel Reeves appearing to drop this potential policy because of the impact in the public sector. The LCP report identifies 3 changes to the pension system that they believe is most likely based on the following criteria. The change would create significant revenue for the government. The change would primarily impact the wealthy. It could be implemented quickly and does not disincentivize investing for retirement. So the first pension change they believe is quite likely is a potential reduction in the tax-free cash lump sum. Now, I covered this in a recent video, and it does look like this could be one the government does look to pursue. Currently, when taking your pension benefits from a defined contribution pension scheme, you can take up to 25% of your pension value as a tax-free lump sum. This can be taken in one go or can be spread out over a period of time. Defined benefit pension scheme members can also take out a pension tax-free lump sum when they come to take benefits, but it's slightly more complex in terms of how this is worked out. Now, there is already a cap on the total amount of pension tax-free lump sum you can have over the course of your lifetime. This is called the lump sum allowance and is currently £268,275. The report believes the most likely scenario is a reduction in this cap, perhaps to £100,000. Now, some of the reasons why the government might introduce this pension change is because, firstly, not many people have pension pots at the size that would eventually reach the lump sum allowance. So this change would impact primarily the more wealthy. It's also relatively easy to implement because it's just a reduction in the current cap, although they may wish to introduce some form of transitional protection for those that are already over or very close to the current lump sum allowance. Now, with any of these changes, there are also reasons why the government might not do it, and why it might not be very politically acceptable for the government to do the change. In this case, firstly, we have the issue with if it's only going to affect the more wealthy, then the tax revenue raised is going to be significantly less. The Institute for Fiscal Studies estimate that the total tax revenue that could be raised from completely wiping out the lump sum allowance is only around 5 billion, so not massive. And if you're only going to reduce the cap, that saving is going to be significantly less. Also, the tax saving or the extra revenue generated for people paying more tax on their pensions wouldn't come in one go at the start. It's likely that people would take more income over a longer period, so the extra tax raised would come in stages over time. Now, because of the way defined benefit pensions are worked out, it's likely that public sector workers would be hit significantly and could be one of the worst off under this change. So again, something Labour aren't going to really want to do, affecting their core base. Now let's move on to the second major change to the pension system that could be likely in the upcoming budget. And this is all around employer national insurance contributions on pension contributions. So currently, employers pay national insurance on workers' salary at a rate of 13.8%. However, if the employer makes pension contributions for the worker as part of their remuneration package, then they don't pay national insurance on the money used to make the contribution. Now, this does save the employer quite a bit of money in tax, but as we have seen earlier, it does cost the government around 23.8 billion a year in tax relief. Now, the potential change that has also been put forward by the Resolution Foundation and the Institute for Fiscal Studies is that employers should start paying national insurance contribution on pension contributions they make. So let's have a look at some of the reasons why the government might want to make this change. First of all, it can be implemented very quickly and therefore can start raising money straight away, and quite a significant amount of money. The immediate hit is on businesses and not workers. So this sticks with the government's line of not raising taxes on working people. It's raising taxes on businesses instead. But in the long run, workers could be impacted because they could be paid less in terms of salary. All the price of the goods and services in the shops could be significantly more as businesses look to recoup the costs of this extra tax. I mean, some of the reasons why the government might not do it is because it does go against their growth agenda. You know, they've come out and said they want to grow the economy. They want to be pro-business. Well, this is a bit of an attack on business if they do bring this in. And again, like a lot of this stuff, it would impact the public sector. It would cost the government more because they would have to increase the budgets of all these public sector employers to cover the increased cost of employer national insurance contributions. So when we factor in this increased cost that the government would have to provide to the public sector, this brings down the net saving or the net extra tax revenue from bringing in this change to around 16 billion. Still a significant sum. Another big issue is that it could impact the funding position of defined benefit pensions more generally, particularly in the private sector. A lot of defined benefit pensions in the private sector aren't funded appropriately. Yeah, they're running a deficit. So every now and then, employers have to make a large one-off contribution to keep plugging that gap. If it costs them more to make those pension contributions because they have to pay additional employers' national insurance contributions, they're less likely to be able to fund that gap. So more defined benefit pensions would remain unfunded, putting people's retirements at risk in the long run. And also, employers might reduce their overall pension contributions down to the minimum allowed, which is then going to have another knock-on effect for people's retirement savings. But this potential change does tick a lot of boxes for the government, and is probably one of the best solutions for them out of a bad bunch of ideas. And they could bring this in a number of different ways to soften the impact. For example, they could bring in a new rate of employer national insurance for pension contributions only, and then increase that rate over time, so there's not such a big hit up front straight away. Or they could say only a percentage of employers' pension contributions are subject to national insurance. There's lots of ways they can tweak this and come up with an optimal strategy for them. Okay, the third and final area that the LCP report predicts that could be changed regarding pensions is the tax treatment of pension death benefits. Now, there are two different ways the government could raise some money here. Currently, if you die before age 75, your beneficiaries can inherit your defined contribution pension pot without paying any tax on it, subject to the lump sum and death benefit allowance. But if you die after age 75, your beneficiaries will pay income tax at their marginal rate on any withdrawals from the defined contribution pension. Now, to change this, the government could simply say that anyone dies before age 75, the pension pot is completely taxable the same way it is if you died after age 75. Now, the second change the government could make here is to make all pension pots subject to inheritance tax, because currently pension pots are outside of your estate for inheritance tax, so they are not applicable to inheritance tax on death. So if we look at the reasons why the government might make this change and why it might be popular for the government, is firstly because, again, these measures mainly impact the wealthier. If your estate is at a size that you have to start paying inheritance tax, it's likely you're going to be more wealthier than the average person. It's also relatively simple to implement. Again, not much needs to change in the pension world to get this policy through. But again, it's not all plain sailing for the government, and there are reasons why they might not go ahead with this change. Now, one reason is because most people nowadays do live past age 75. So actually bringing in a change to that rule is not going to bring that much in terms of extra tax revenue through the doors. Again, it also unfairly penalises defined contribution pension holders over defined benefit pension holders, because defined benefit pensions don't pay a lump sum on death. In most cases, instead, they pay an income to the surviving spouse or civil partner, so that is not subject to inheritance tax. And although it is rising, inheritance tax is not a huge tax intake for the government, and if they do make pensions subject to inheritance tax, it might change people's behaviour. They might start gifting away money out of their pensions to their beneficiaries, and that money is then outside of their estate after 7 years of making the gift. Now, it could mean an increase in income tax because people start withdrawing from their pensions, but again, this wouldn't raise much money in the short term. It would be money that's raised over time. Now, looking at all the pension options and the size of the numbers involved, it does look like that something has to change on pensions in this budget. And the three changes outlined earlier do seem to offer the government the best route to achieving some of their objectives here, with some form of national insurance contribution on employers' pension contributions seeming to be the most likely, I would say. Of course, we still don't know what is going to happen for sure at this stage. And it seems to be now every day we're reading about a climb back down from a policy that the government had previously seemed keen to implement. So we might get to the stage, but by the time the budget rolls around, there's been so much political fallout, they do water everything down, and actually the budget could be quite tame. Part of me thinks that nowadays politicians are very weak, and all they're really interested in is maintaining their votes and their seat at the next election. So actually they don't really want to rock the boat too much. They want to kick a lot of these cans down the road. But the other part of me thinks that if you are going to bring in major changes and really ramp up the taxation of people, you're going to want to do this earlier in your term. And it's obviously being the government's first budget, it then gives them another 4 years or so to come up with much more positive news to try and get their vote back at the next election. So if they're going to do anything, now's the time to do these major changes. Now, in terms of what you should do, again, like I've mentioned in the last few videos, you only really want to be carrying out plans that you were already planning to do, rather than reacting to what you think might happen in the budget. Remember, any retirement plan should be focusing on the long term. Don't get carried away of what might be happening in the short term. Now, if you do want a budget summary delivered straight to your email inbox once I've had time to digest all the details, please do sign up to my newsletter and you'll get that straight away as soon as it's ready. I hope you found this video useful. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And fingers crossed we get through this budget without too much extra taxation. Until next time, take care.